Danielle DiMartino Booth is a global thought leader sought for insights on the financial markets and monetary policy both in the U.S. and abroad. She's founder of the economic consulting firm Money Strong, LLC, a full-time columnist for Bloomberg View, and author of the Amazon bestseller Fed Up, an insider's take on why the Federal Reserve is bad for America. Danielle, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, I have to confess, I know you told me that you're actually in Idaho right now, and I have to confess, I've never been to Idaho, but obviously the Skype doesn't work too well in Idaho from what I understand. Is that correct?
Clearly, we've had some technical difficulties, indeed.
So listen, you say you're a Fed insider. In what way?
A former Fed insider, and I actually like to say reform. I advised Richard Fisher when he was president of the Dallas Federal Reserve for the better part of a decade throughout the financial crisis. He and I had one thing in common. Neither of us were PhDs in economics. Both of us were MBAs in finance who'd come from Wall Street.
Ah, I see. So I actually had an interview with him, I think 2.5 years ago when the Fed first started raising interest rates. We were on a show together. And smart man, can't argue with anything Mr. Fisher says. So what prompted you?
I tended to not argue with the boss.
That's right. What prompted you to write the book?
Well, in the years that followed the financial crisis, there was an internal recognition at the Fed that something had gone seriously wrong, and that part was good. And they determined that what the gauges that they used to follow price movements, inflation, and what have you, had really failed them. They had failed to capture the runaway home prices, the runaway prices in the stock market, and they determined that they needed to come up with a new inflation measure. And I was very excited when this determination came down, and then they promptly chose to do nothing. Their inflation gauges gave them license to be lower for longer, and that's what they chose to do. They chose to keep their blinders on, and as a result, I became very fed up.
Well, the old saying, figures don't lie, but liars figure. You could make numbers say pretty much whatever you want. So you say in some ways we'd be better off without the Federal Reserve. But then, we've come a long way from the days when J.P. Morgan had to jump in and play the role of the Federal Reserve. What would we do without a Federal Reserve, or what we would have in place of a Federal Reserve if they were to go away?
Well, let me be really clear. I am not an advocate of ending the Fed at all. In fact, the last chapter of Fed Up goes through a blueprint of how I would reinvent the Fed. But for national security and financial stability purposes, I'm a huge advocate of keeping the Fed. It just needs to be taken down to the studs.
So in the minute or so we have left in this segment, tell us, what are the top one or two things that you think need to be done to fix the Fed?
I think the lines of the Fed need to be redrawn to represent the economy the United States is today, not what it was in 1913, and that all districts should have permanent votes, and that the Fed's dual mandate of maximizing employment and minimizing inflation should be taken back to what it was before 1977, and that is just minimizing inflation.
Do you think that the Federal Reserve now, don't ask, don't tell, they won't talk about this, but really cares about what the stock market participants think?
I think that the onus is upon the Fed to prove that they no longer care what the stock market thinks, because since 1987, when Greenspan came into office, the tail wagged the dog, and the Fed allowed the stock market to dictate monetary policy.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Danielle, thank you. We'll be right back with a little bit more. So Danielle, please stay with us. And you stay with us also. We'll be right back here with more on the income generation. And we're back now with more with Danielle DiMartino Booth. So Danielle, I agree completely. I think the Federal Reserve has gotten a little bit too concerned about Wall Street. And I think now they've got their hands filled trying to prove that they're not, that they really don't care what happens with Wall Street and with the stock market or what Wall Street thinks. So Let's switch gears for just a minute if we can. You know, you, like I, had predicted the housing collapse back in 2007. What do you see on the horizon now? What risks exist now? Do you see any major fundamental collapses coming up in the future, potentially? Talk to us about that.
So one of the things I've been following the most closely, and just one word on housing very quickly, just because housing is not as overvalued as it was during 2006, 2007, does not mean that housing is not at a very high risk right now of undergoing a major correction. But that is housing. The bigger risk, I think, is where the new sources of leverage are in the current era, and that would be in the corporate bond market. I took a deep dive in and looked at what corporate bonds leveraged loans look like, and because of the degradation of the quality within the investment grade bond universe, these are the supposedly the highest pristine quality bonds, but now we have over 50% of the investment grade bond market is triple B in credit ratings, which is one notch above junk.
They're barely investment grade, that's right.
Barely investment grade, over 50% of the investment grade market today. Net leverage at these companies has doubled since 2000. PIMCO pointed this out. So when you look at the true, what I call the true investment grade market, it's about $2.5 trillion. And I look at the other $5 trillion of the market as being really what we should call junk. And speaking of the housing market and the subprime crisis, investors are blindly, on faith, taking the credit rating agencies' due diligence and not doing their own homework. And these are the things that worry me.
Danielle, I agree with you 100%. You know, it's funny, you're getting into what we do at our company, really a lot of corporate bond issues. And I've been saying for a long time that just buying triple B bonds, these brokers that are just buying triple B bonds across the board and not doing a deep dive on the credit and the financials are really not doing their clients a service. So I have a bigger concern though, and we only have about 20 seconds left to cover it, but you tell me, in some ways, aren't municipal bonds even a bigger concern today?
Oh, I certainly think that municipal bonds are like walking through a minefield because there are so many insolvent states and insolvent cities. And we have to bear in mind, though, that only cities can declare bankruptcy, i.e. Chicago of the future, but not Illinois of the future, the state that is against the Constitution.
Unfortunately, President Trump taking away some of those tax deductions of state and local income taxes, I don't think has helped that very much. Danielle, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. And you stay with us. We'll be right back with more on The Income Generation.